You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Listening to WCDB 90.9, University at Albany. Welcome to the show. And Andrew, how are you this morning?
I am doing well.
I'm not. I can't hear anything on my headphones.
Oh, man. That's not good.
No, it isn't. But can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay,
I can hear
good.
you just fine.
I fix it. We need new equipment here.
We do.
How do we get it?
SA budget.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, this thing is... All right, I think I'm fooling around with this. All right. Well, we got a good show coming up this morning. First of all, we're going to start a whole new thing every week. We have Hillary Kloss. Hillary is an MSW student here at the School of Social Welfare. And Hillary is going to be calling in from her internship to tell us what is happening around campus that has to do with the School of Social Welfare, because there are lots of events. Many of you don't know what they are. You don't find out until the last minute. And so we don't want that to happen, because there's just a lot of good stuff happening here for social workers, for professors, or even just those of you in the community who are interested in certain topics that pertain to our School of Social Welfare. So we're going to set up a situation every week where we have Hillary calling in. We're waiting for her to call in, and will update us on the events at SUNY Albany. And I hear the phone ringing. That's Hillary, and we're trying to get that in order. But we also have one guest this morning, and she'll be on later in the show. She is a professor at Northwestern University. She is a lawyer. She graduated from a Yale undergraduate and Harvard Law School. And her new book is called Fatal Invention: How Science, Politics, and Big Business Recreate Race in the 21st Century. So that's a hot topic, and we're going to be exploring that probably, in the latter part of this half hour. We now have Hillary Kloss with us this morning. Hillary, how are you this morning? I can't hear you, Hillary. And I don't think that it's Hillary. It's probably our board. We're like we are getting some
strangeness.
We have some strangeness. I can hear you, Andrew. See, this is what, when I went to radio school, and then I worked at this small radio station outside of Albany. And there's always stuff that's happening with the equipment in a radio. I don't care if it's a big station or a small station, or even our station, which is a university station. So it's all about radio, and radio when it's live, and we are live, although you can listen to us archived every week. Can we hear her now, Hillary?
Hello.
Hello, we've got you on the line. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Well, I just did a great announcement for you.
Oh, good.
Yeah, Hillary Kloss, MSW, is going to be with us every week to give us the School of Social Welfare updates in terms of what is happening in and around the campus, and I guess in and around the Capital District as well, right?
Yep. We have a few things going on immediately. One thing going on for the entire month of November, and then two big events this weekend. In honor of Homeless Awareness Month, the School of Social Welfare, along with the Capital Region Coalition to End Homelessness, is doing a cell phone drive. So anyone who has old cell phones, they can be donated and then turned in for money to donate to the cause. And there's going to be a box outside of Richardson 120, which is on the downtown campus.
Downtown campus. I went there 20 years ago, and I still can't tell which is uptown and downtown.
Right.
The downtown campus is the campus that's closer to the city, closer to Albany.
Yes, yep. It's at 135 Western Avenue. And the downtown campus was actually the original campus, and then the uptown campus, which is a larger one up towards Crossgates, was actually built in 1966. So people usually think the uptown campus was the main campus, but really the downtown campus on Western Avenue was the first one.
That's where all the history was.
Right.
Or where it began. The campus that was the new one.
Right.
You need a GPS to get through this one.
Really?
Yeah, you do.
It's pretty confusing, and everything kind of looks the same and very symmetrical.
Yeah, so you have to. Yeah, I'm like a homing pigeon. I'm able to get to the radio station every week, but that's about it.
Right.
So what do we do? We take so you got old cell phones. There's only one place we can bring them to, and that's at Richardson Hall
Richardson Hall room outside of room 120. So that's right on the first floor of Richardson.
And then what do they do with them? Recycle them, or how do they get money from these things?
Yep, they recycle them. There are different companies that will collect old cell phones and then actually give the companies a profit or things like that. So that's what the Capital Region Coalition to End Homelessness, along with the School of Social Welfare, is trying to do to raise money for the shelter.
How much money do we want to raise? Do we have any idea in terms of numbers that we could get, that we could shoot for?
I don't know for this event offhand, but that's certainly something I can reach out to them and ask.
Yeah, I mean, like, how many cell phones do you actually need? I have them. They're all over my house, hidden in drawers and all over the place. I think I'm going to round them up and then I'll bring them over.
Yeah. We're trying to collect as many as we can, obviously, but I know I have a couple of cell phones that are pretty old that I could donate as well.
All right, so that's great. So we're doing that. We're raising money for the homeless.
Yeah.
And this is, what did you say? So this is December is homeless awareness? November. Oh, we're still in November.
Homeless Awareness Month.
Right, we haven't had Thanksgiving yet. I should be able to remember.
Right, and that box will be out there the entire month.
Great. Good. That's a good thing to do. That's a very practical thing to do. Because I think a lot of people do. You know, you've got these cell phones. Should I keep it? Will I ever use it again? Of course, you're never going to use it again. But then you just keep it and it sits in a drawer and it's not doing anything. And this way it is raising money for the homeless in the Capital District. And this is something the School of Social Welfare is part of in terms of raising this money for the homeless. So that's good. That's a really good thing. Next.
And then on Saturday, we have a conference that's going to take place at the Uptown campus. It's the Engaging Feminisms, Engaging Community Conference. And the idea behind it is creating feminist social change in the Capital Region. So that's Saturday, November 19th, from 10 to 3 at Campus Center 375, which for students who don't know, the Campus Center is essentially in the center of campus. It's kind of like the student union, and it's going to be on the third floor in room 375. And what their flyer says is Engaging Feminisms, Engaging Community will bring together activists, organizers, advocates, students, university faculty, and staff to foster and discuss feminist social change in the Capital Region of New York, and to answer the question, how do we work together to create useful knowledge and to support social justice struggles throughout the region and the world?
That's a big topic. That's a big order. I mean, yes, it is. But engaging feminism, is this open? Did you say, is this open to the general public as well?
Yes, it is.
It is. And is it free or is there a cost?
I believe it's free. There's registration online if you go to holdingourownonline.org/EF for Engaging Feminisms. If you go on there, that's where all the registration information is. They ask that people register by November 12th, which has already passed, but it's still worthwhile. You might want to reach out to them, see if you can still register.
I mean, that sounds like a great conference. And, you know, feminism has taken on a new, I guess, meaning. They they talk about the new feminism.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know, do you know what the new feminism is? You do?
Well, a little bit. Obviously, what feminism used to mean was, only women advocating for women's rights. And kind of more recently, feminism has evolved into including anyone who is for gender equality. So, like, a man could be a feminist if he believes that men and women should have equal rights. A woman can be a feminist. It's more the idea that men and women are equal. It's no longer just women fighting for women.
So it's gender equality is what it is. Is that what
right.
Is that what you said? Gender equality. So men can fight for gender equality, and it can benefit them as well. I think maybe men have evolved and learned that it can. And I think that feminism got a bad rap, particularly in my generation, of everybody was, it meant to burn your bra, which I could do at that time, but not now. But it was like, that feminists didn't like men, or they hated men, or that there was, the us and them kind of thing. And I'm not so sure that was really true. But that was the rap. That was kind of like what I think many people used who didn't want women to emerge as equal, and so that they would say, that they had this kind of like perception, or tried to raise the perception that it was kind of an angry movement, which it wasn't necessarily, not at all, at least not in my case. Yeah. So But it's good. It's good to have this conference to highlight how it has changed over the years and how it's more of a community issue. It's no longer just women. So, Hillary, what about the young men today? What is their response to the new feminism?
I've personally seen, especially in the school of social welfare, that men are for it. They believe in it. They want gender equality, and they're stepping up and acting on it. It's a growing trend, so I wouldn't necessarily assume that all men are feminists, but there is definitely a growth in that area.
Great. Okay, so just mention the conference one more time, the date, the time, and so we can make sure that everybody has this information.
Yes, it's the Engaging Feminism's Engaging Community Conference, and that's going to take place on Saturday, November 19th, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. in Campus Center 375 at the Uptown Albany campus, 1400 Washington Ave.
Terrific. And do we have any other events
Yep, there's one other event. It's not necessarily related to the School of Social Welfare, and the School of Social Welfare is one of the sponsors for that conference on Saturday, just so students know. But on Sunday, the Vintage Pride of UAlbany is hosting their autumn potluck lunch, and that's Sunday, November 20th from 1 to 3 p.m. at the First Presbyterian Church, 362 State Street, Albany. And they do this every
Can you
so
mention
often.
the name of the group again? Because I missed that. That was you kind of went off the mic a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It's Vintage Pride.
Vintage Pride. Okay.
Yeah. And it's a part of the Pride Center of the Capital Region.
Yep.
And what this potluck is it's a casual social opportunity for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people over the age of 55, and they can bring a dish to share, enjoy drinks and desserts, all provided by the Pride Center.
Terrific. Hence, vintage.
Yes.
Vintage. Yes. Okay. So that's the Pride Center, and they are sponsoring this with the School of Social Welfare?
No,
this is their own. Okay, so that's Vintage Pride, and it's sponsored by the Pride Center of Albany. And over 55 folks, you have to be over 55, gay, lesbian, transgendered, bring a potluck dinner and have a good time. That sounds great. Yeah. Yep. Okay, very cool. All right. Well, we got a lot of good things to go to, Hillary. Now we are going to take a break, and we'll talk to you next week.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks so much. Hillary Kloss, MSW student here at the School of Social Welfare. I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, with Andrew White, my board op, and my best buddy now. He's a good buddy. You're listening to the Social Workers. We're going to WCDV FM 90.9. Don't go away. We'll be back in a minute.
This is the sound of a flat-screen television hurled off a building. Now the new bike your kid wants. These are the things you could have, all cast into oblivion. Because when you throw away money on wasted electricity, you throw away everything you could have bought with it. Use Energy Star light bulbs and appliances, and you could save hundreds of dollars a year. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Energy and the Ad Council.
Everybody, let's go, let's go. Ho, ho. Welcome, everyone, to West High School Spring Fling. Hey, where we at,
Alright, I've gone through all the tracks, just move through the beats. Do your thing.
All right, everyone, let's hear it for West High's own Brooke Turner, a.k.a. DJ Hook.
Scratching at my first school dance takes confidence. So we're getting into college. I've got what it takes. Okay, I went through the practice sessions, I slept good, I feel good.
We will now begin the test. Please take out your pencils.
I got this.
We're all good at something. Maybe it's breakdancing or skateboarding or video games. Whatever you're good at, you had the skills to make it happen. And those same skills will help us get to college. Visit knowhowtogo.org to learn what you should be doing right now to prepare for college. Start taking the steps at knowhowtogo.org.
I've got what it takes. So do you.
Brought to you by the American Council on Education, Lumina Foundation, and the Ad Council.
My purse is upstairs on my bed.
It's not here.
What about your sister's room?
Nope.
The upstairs closet?
No.
The downstairs closet?
Mom, there are no more closets.
I'm sorry, honey. It was right here all along.
Moms everywhere are finding ways to keep their kids active and healthy. Get ideas, get involved, get going at letsmove.gov. Brought to you by the USDA, HHS, and the Ad Council.
My name is Manny Morales. I'm 45 and I coach youth football. It's still hard to believe because the high school me
was a work in progress. But big brothers, big sisters give me a real role model. And the young me
needed a role model bad.
My big brother's name is Ray, and Ray is the reason that this 7-year-old grows up to be a role model himself.
Whether you donate money or time, you're helping Big Brothers Big Sisters help a child. Start something today at BigBrothersBigSisters.org. Brought to you by Big Brothers Big Sisters and the Ad Council.
The full moon lights the silver rails winding around dark mountains and over steep gorges of jagged rock and one freezing cold rushing black mountain river. I wish there was enough time to describe all of the funny twists and turns that led up to now, but there isn't enough time because there's a ticking clock and the 2 passengers we care most about don't know anything about it. To see what happens next, visit read.gov to read The Exquisite Corpse, a riveting adventure pieced together by John Sheska, Shannon Hale, Daniel Handler, and other popular authors. Explore new worlds. Read. Brought to you by the Library of Congress and the Ad Council.
We're back. I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to The Social Workers. You can listen to us at WCDB 90.9 FM here at the University of Albany. You can listen to us every week live from 9 to 10. And later in the day, we put the show up in our archives, and it's up for, I think, almost 16 weeks, 12 weeks, and you can download the show. And we've had quite a few downloads lately. See, we can track who's downloading us, who's downloading the show, how many people are listening to the show, and we've got a few hundred people now who are listening to the show. So be sure and tell your friends. We're a local show where, as I said, and if you were just joining us earlier in the show, we had Hillary Kloss, who's an MSW student, and she's going to be on every week to tell us events that are happening in and around the Capital District here at the university that are related to topics that social welfare kinds of topics, policy topics that involve social welfare. So she had several events that she told us about this morning. There's been a lot of stuff in the news, obviously, about the Penn State incidents, horrific incidents about child abuse, sexual molestation, etc. And I wanted to recommend a book because I had spoke to someone on one of my other shows who is a survivor of sexual abuse. And she is an attorney and now works with children who are survivors themselves. She works in community organizations. Olga Trujillo, Trujillo. And her book is a fascinating personal story about her experience of being molested, sexually beaten by her father and her brothers. Her mother was aware that this was happening, but she herself was being beaten up by her father. It's a horrific story. This went on for 10 years. The name of the book is called The Sum of My Parts, a survivor's story of dissociative identity disorder. So in order for her, as she describes it, Olga, to survive this horrific stuff that was happening to her at the time, and it began, this sexual harassment's the wrong word, that she was beaten up and she was sexually molested, began before she even got into kindergarten. And one of the points of the story is that nobody did anything about it and people knew about it. Now, this was several decades ago in the 70s. So I'm not so sure that things have changed necessarily, given what's happened at Penn State and no one really doing anything about this alleged molestation by this coach. So her next door neighbor knew about it. The school, there was a teacher who, when she was in school, when she was in elementary school, who noticed that there were bruises and stuff on her body and would ask her to come in and ask her questions about what was happening at home. And of course, she said she lied because she was afraid. She was afraid that her father would kill her or kill her mother. And he wasn't even the breadwinner in the family, because sometimes that's a reason why women stay with men, even when they know that the man is hurting their children and themselves. He was at home. He didn't have a job. He couldn't get a job. It was her mother who was supporting the family, along with food stamps and other things. They had to be subsidized housing, but still, and her mother was still afraid of him, still afraid of him leaving her because of the complex nature of the relationship. So what happened was, for 10 years, her father molested her. And when he died, her brothers continued to do what her father had done to her. And they felt like they were able to do this because they had watched their father molest his daughter. And so that gave them permission to molest their sister. And it's quite a story. How Olga coped with this And very often, I guess this is a coping mechanism, is she would have this, and I describe it, this is not as kind of like an outer body experience. She would compartmentalize when she was going through the abuse. She would actually, in her mind, she said, think about something else and project her mind onto the ceiling as if she were watching what was happening to her, that she wasn't actually part of it, that this wasn't who she was. And that's the definition of dissociative identity disorder. So, very early on, she learned to separate from these vicious attacks in a process known as disassociation, which was blocking herself from the terrors of her real life. So that's how she tried to make this stuff go away in her head. And temporarily, and I emphasize it was only temporarily, was she able to forget the abuse so that she could continue to function, or so it appeared, so she could continue to function like any other child. Of course, this, in reality, that's not what was happening. So, in the book, The Sum of My Parts, Olga tells her story from the time she began to split into, quote, parts, through her struggle to put herself back together emotionally, and finally develop a whole picture of her life for the first time. Today, I mean, she was able to do that through the process of therapy, and as an attorney now, she, as I mentioned earlier, works with communities on issues involving domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, and the impact of trauma. The story has a good ending, but anyway, the name of the book is The Sum of My Parts: A Survivor's Story of Dissociative Identity Disorder, Olga Trujillo. Now, my next guest is Dorothy Roberts. Dorothy Roberts is she has a new book. She's a professor of law at Northwestern University. She has an undergraduate degree from Yale University and a law degree from Harvard Law School. She is an author, lecturer, and lawyer. She's written extensively, and what she writes about and what she lectures about are the interplay of gender, race, and class in legal issues concerning reproduction, motherhood, bioethics, and child welfare. Her new book is Fatal Invention: How Science, Politics, and Big Business Recreate Race in the 21st Century. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you on, Professor Roberts.
Thank you. It's good to be on your show.
It's great to have you. Okay, this Fatal Invention: How Science, Politics, and Big Business Recreate Race in the 21st Century. I guess my first question, and what you introduce in the book, is race is a political, not a biological definition. What do we mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that the very idea to divide human beings up into, say, 4 or 5 or 6 types of people is a political decision. And it came out of the era of slavery and colonialism because it was useful for governing people and putting them in different positions of power, who could own slaves, who was born a slave. There is no way to biologically identify different races in the human species. The human species does not have groupings that are so genetically distinct from each other that you could call them races. And so biologically, there is no set of races within the human species. We're one human race, but we are politically divided up into races, and that division depends on the particular legal and social, cultural definition at the time and in a particular society. So one way you know it's political is because it changes depending on the politics. So who we think of as Black or African American today is different from how people think about who's Black in other countries, and different than several hundred years ago. And same thing for who we think of as white or Asian.
I want to go back a little. I just want to go back a
Sure.
minute because, you're talking about giving examples of race really as a political entity definition and not biological. And maybe people or listeners who were at a university, we're at this University of Albany here, I think they need to know about the human genome story because 10 years ago, this is scientific fact. Yeah. Let's talk about that we're all alike, 90.9999%, right?
Right. Well, the human genome confirmed what evolutionary biologists and physical anthropologists had already known, that the human species isn't divided into races. That's an old concept that, came out of the 17th and 18th centuries. So I want to make it clear that it was already known that human beings are very much alike across the world genetically, but also that there's more genetic variation within the groups we call races than there is between them. So that was known already. Then the Human Genome Project, which mapped the entire human genome, all the different gene variants in the human genome, found that human beings, or confirmed, I would say, that human beings are very, very much the same. As you said, Bill Clinton announced 99.9% the same genetically, but that's changed a little bit. I actually think that what is the most important fact is not just how similar we are. We are so much more similar than, say, populations of chimpanzees. Human beings are much more similar to each other, but also that if you look at the diversity among human beings, you cannot divide it up into a handful of groups called races. So it's not only that we're really similar, but also, obviously, the problem is people will see that and say, oh, but I can see that as a white person, I look really different than a black person. So they'll say there are differences. Well, yeah, there are differences genetically both among people who identify as white and between people who identify as white and black or Asian or whatever, but they're not divided up into discrete races that are genetically identifiable. There's a lot of variety and there's a lot of unity in the human species. When we say I can tell who's white or I can tell who's black, we only know that. We can only tell that because we're referring to social and legal rules. One way of putting it that I find helpful is that we think of black people as anyone having any African ancestry. But what if we thought that white people were anyone who had any European ancestry? Then most African Americans in this country would all of a sudden be white. There's no reason to pick one definition over the other. It's just historically, because it was important to enslave anyone with any African ancestry and maintain a pure white race, it was defined that way. But it could have just as easily been defined as anyone who has any European ancestry is white. In which case, even though I identify now as black, I would be considered white. So it's a legal and social definition, not a biological definition.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, well, what are the differences between men and women? How does that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think that gets complicated because gender is also a social construction. There are ways in which we identify what's masculine, what's feminine. All of that is heavily influenced by society. But I think that there still are ways of dividing male and female biologically that you cannot do with race. There's more of a biological basis of dividing male and female. I'm not saying that it's absolute, because there have been cases where, people aren't sure if the person falls into the male or female category. So I'm not at all saying it's absolute or that it doesn't depend on interpretation, social interpretation. But race, the very concept, the very idea of dividing human beings into types of people is a political decision. It's not rooted in biology. It's rooted in a decision that it's important to classify people into groups in order to govern them. There's no biological reason to do it. There's nothing inherently different biologically in the different groups we classify as races.
So race, and as I having read your book and listening to you, I mean, it's so ingrained in our belief system because it doesn't exist. And yet we still go on. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you asked 10 people on the street, they would probably say, oh, yes, there are different races.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally ingrained in the way that we think about people, in the assumptions we make about people, in the way doctors practice medicine, in the way we identify ourselves. And I don't want to say it's not real. It is a real way that people are classified, and it has very real consequences for people. I think it has consequences for every single aspect of people's lives.
Well, you talk about, talk about, and I agree with you. I think that's true.
Yeah.
And what you talk about in the book, I want you to kind of hone in on this. You say race-based technology. What is that? I mean, they have specific drugs now for black patients. I mean, talk to us about that.
Yes. So what I point out in the book is despite what we've just been talking about, that race is a political and not a biological category, and despite the Human Genome Project confirming that, immediately after the human genome was mapped, many scientists began looking for race-specific difference at the genetic level. And that has turned into race-specific, it's turned into the proposals for race-specific medicine, and the FDA has, in fact, approved the first race-specific drug, a drug for heart failure patients called Bidil that is marketed to African Americans. So it was approved as a therapy for heart failure in African American patients.
How do they justify that? I mean, if your heart fails, your heart fails. I mean, I don't know. But
Exactly. Well, that's right. But the way they justified it is that the manufacturer conducted a clinical trial only with African American patients, and it worked on African American patients. But the cardiologist who developed it for any patient. But in order to get a renewal of his patent so he could have a monopoly on this drug, he added that it was for African American patients. There was no change in the formula at all. It was the same drug that originally was going to be marketed to anybody who could use it. And so when it was shown to work in African Americans, but note this trial didn't compare it whether it worked in other groups, the FDA approved it just for African Americans, which was a radical departure from its other practices of approving drugs tested in any human being that worked in those human beings for other human beings. All of a sudden now, it allowed this drug to be approved based on a race-specific clinical test and marketed by race. And the theory was that there was something different about heart failure in black patients, or something different about how they responded to the drug, a completely untested theory that self-identified race was being used as a surrogate or proxy for genetic difference, thereby confirming they didn't confirm it, but reinforcing this view that people of different races are genetically distinct, should use different medications because they have different kinds of diseases. And that is just completely unscientific, unproven. There was nothing in the development of this drug that showed that it couldn't work on people other than black people, or that there was something unique and peculiar about black people in the way they experience heart failure or the way they should be treated by medication.
Professor, so talk to us then. I mean, this sounds somewhat to me like a slippery slope that's not too good, and that what the consequences of doing, I mean, this was one study and one drug, but if this is something that is a trend, then what?
Well, I think that unless there is more criticism of it, it will be a trend. We know that already drug companies are conducting race-based clinical trials. This can be a model for the way in which pharmaceutical and biotech companies can exploit race as a convenient but very unscientific substitute for genetic difference in order to market and get monopoly power over certain drugs. And what's dangerous about it are two things. I think one is that it masks the social reasons why black people die at younger ages and at higher rates of heart failure, because it implies that race is a biological category that naturally produces these health disparities in cancer, in asthma, in hypertension because of genetic difference, when the truth is race is a political category that has these staggering biological consequences, not because of some innate genetic difference, but because of the impact of social inequality in people's health. And we don't want us to take attention away from those social inequities. Unfortunately, I think if we continue down this road of reinforcing the myth that race is a biological category, that's exactly what will happen. It might be beneficial for pharmaceutical companies, but it's going to make people's health worse because we're not addressing the social inequities that cause these stark outcomes in people's health.
So what do you say to the average person who says, well, what about this? You know, Jews, for instance, and I'm Jewish, cystic fibrosis. Yes. Cystic fibrosis is common I mean, it's more prevalent in the Jewish community. Or sickle cell anemia is more prevalent in the black community. How does that fit into this whole picture?
Okay. Well, I would say, first of all, those are rare types of diseases that are so associated with a particular genetic mutation. Cancer, diabetes, hypertension, other cardiovascular diseases, asthma, that sort of thing. Those are all the diseases that people are dying from, you know, at very high, too high rates, and that where we see these huge gaps in health along racial lines. So, and those diseases, these common diseases, are highly affected by social conditions and access to health care and that sort of thing. The second thing I would say is that, yes, different populations, especially if they are populations that have historically been isolated from each other, or, you know, so that there is a lot more genetic similarity within the population, may have higher rates of certain diseases. But race isn't the right term for that. So, for example, sickle cell anemia is a disease linked to a genetic mutation found in regions where there's a high prevalence of malaria, because the trait offered an immunity to malaria. It's not that all black people have this trait. People whose ancestors came from certain regions of the world where there is a high rate of malaria are more likely to have it. But it doesn't identify a whole race of people, nor is it the case that everyone in the group we call a race, would have the trait. It's just a matter of a greater likelihood, and you have to be more specific than a whole race of people to really get down to who's at risk of having these genetic diseases. So, for example, if you take the certain diseases like Tay-Sachs, for example, more commonly found in Ashkenazi Jews than other groups, what race would you be talking about? Jews at one point, not too long ago, the turn of the 20th century, weren't considered white. Now they are considered white. But if you use the race of white people, it's too broad to be able to give you any real indication of whether someone is likely to have a genetic trait or not. And then if you take African Americans, African Americans include people whose ancestors came from Africa, and it could be from multiple parts of Africa. Africa has more genetic diversity than any continent in the world. But it could also include people, most of whose ancestors are white or Asian. Take Tiger Woods. Most of his ancestors are from Asia, yet most people would classify him as black. So his race doesn't really tell you very much at all about the likelihood that he would have some gene that's more prevalent in one population than another. He's more likely to have a gene that's prevalent in certain Asian populations than in African populations. So race just is a poor proxy for biological genetic difference. It's much more likely to tell you whether someone's social conditions would increase their risk of dying younger from a disease. That's what we should really be concerned about. I talk about in the book breast cancer in Chicago. In Chicago, black women have a slightly lower incidence of breast cancer. They're less likely to get breast cancer than white women, but they're twice as likely to die from breast cancer. And that gap was created over the last 20 years. In 1980, black and white women in Chicago died at the same rate from breast cancer. And so you have to explain, how could it be between 1980 and 2000 that black women came to die at twice the rate when it used to be the same rate? Well, the explanation is that white women's rate of death was cut in half because they had the advantage of the best detection from mammography, high quality mammography, the best treatment for breast cancer. Because in Chicago, black people tend to live in segregated black neighborhoods where there isn't good health care. And so black women didn't get any benefit at all from the improvements in cancer detection and therapy over the last 20 years, whereas white women did, and their breast cancer rate was cut in half. That is dramatic. That's what we should be trying to address. I believe that the statistics show that if we could improve the treatment and detection for breast cancer among black women, we would save hundreds and hundreds of lives of black women in Chicago. There's excellent evidence for that. There's less evidence for looking for a gene that explains why black women die of breast cancer at higher rates. And I think that if we continue down this path of defining race biologically and using that as the explanation for all the gaps in health, and we've been talking about health, but it could be extended to gaps in wealth, gaps in education, gaps in imprisonment. We know from history biological explanations for inequities that are caused by social injustice cover up the need for social change, and they also often lead to terrifying solutions for what's seen as biological difference.
Yeah. So it's social, it's political, and it's economic, and that's what we're ignoring, or the reasons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There was a study that came out in a health journal called Health Affairs recently called Place Not Race that showed that the reason why blacks, or one of the key reasons why blacks have such poor health compared to whites is because they tend to be segregated in neighborhoods that have all sorts of hazards for people's health. But this study looked at an integrated poor neighborhood in Baltimore and found that most of the health gap in various diseases either disappeared altogether between blacks and whites or shrunk tremendously. There's a huge difference in the health of blacks who live in integrated neighborhoods with whites and those who live in segregated black neighborhoods.
And isn't it? Wouldn't it be, Professor?
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that it's a class. Isn't it a class thing? I mean, white or black. If you're upper middle class or you're middle class, you're going to get better care and you're going to do better.
Yes. Well, this also has been shown definitively in studies in Great Britain where the researchers, the famous study, tracked health in the upper classes, down to the lower classes, and health declines as you go from the wealthiest, people with the most advantaged position down through the ranks to the janitor. Health declines at every level. So the link between social status and health has been firmly established. Race, it tracks that, but it also adds another layer. That's why I don't want to say it's only poverty. Poverty has a lot to do with it, as these neighborhood studies show, but there are also ways in which blacks are experience discrimination, both in society, which takes a toll on your health. More and more studies are showing that stress is linked to a whole host of bad effects on your health and consequent diseases, and experiencing discrimination causes stress. And then there's also the way that blacks and other people of color experience discrimination by the health care community. Studies showing, for example, that blacks are less likely to get pain relief for the exact same injuries as whites. Studies that show that blacks wait longer for life-saving treatment when they come to a hospital with a heart attack. And that's been shown even when they have the same insurance as whites and when they go to the same hospital, as well as when they go to the inferior hospitals that they're more likely to go to. So those are just a few examples, but
those are horrific. Those examples. Yeah. I mean, you've laid out these examples, and there are more in the book, Fatal Invention. Yeah. We're talking to Professor Dorothy Roberts. But so, in the time that we have left, what can we do on the show, and I guess just in the time we have left in general? Yeah. What do we do?
Right.
What suggestions? I mean, where should we go from here as a society? As we're here at the School of Social Welfare. What can we do?
Right. Well, I think as a society, just talking in broad terms, I argue that we should, when we're looking at what policies we should support policies that recognize our common humanity and that address the social inequities that lead to the gaps we see along racial lines, as opposed to accepting what we're being told more and more every day, that there are biological distinctions between races, and it's the inherent genetic differences that cause these gaps in health, in intelligence, in criminality. We should be wary of those messages about inherent racial difference. And, whether it's calling legislators who are supporting policies based on that philosophy, or whether it's talking to friends about it, what we teach our children, paying attention to what they're taught in school. I think this is a broad way of thinking about human beings, and there are many, many ways that we can choose the path of common humanity and social justice over the path of genetic distinction and technological fixes that don't really get to the social inequities that we should be addressing. So I guess in the short time we have, I would just appeal to people recognizing that difference and being alert that when they read in the newspapers about a study that refers to, an African gene for asthma or an African gene for hypertension, that they read that with skepticism. And sometimes maybe even go back and look up the study and see the flaws in these studies that claim to find distinctive genes that lead to not only health but personality differences and behavioral differences, and then be ever more adamant about supporting social equality, supporting programs. We should be aware that government is more and more slashing programs that would address the social inequities that lead to these huge gaps in health. Be attuned to the way in which pharmaceutical industries are being called to take care of these differences that we are now not paying attention to at the social level. So I would tie together our advocacy for all sorts of policies that address social inequality along class, race, and gender lines, and see that as part of a path toward affirming our common humanity and against a path that looks to explain these gaps with the myth of racial difference at the genetic level.
Well, you've given us a new lens today, just during this show, to view race, the concept of race, and your book, Fatal Invention. I do want to mention that again because I want to make sure that listeners can know. Well, they know they can buy it bookstores everywhere, online,
yes,
Amazon.com.
Online.
And do you have a website? Do you have a website that they can go to?
Yeah. I do. It's www.dorothy, DOROTHY, dash, as in hyphen, Roberts, ROBERTS.com. So www.dorothy-roberts.com.
Thanks so much for being on the show today. You were,
Thank
yes,
you.
Enlightening.
Well, I hope so. That's my goal.
Yeah.
I think that's the first step.
Well, you're doing it.
We can work together to do more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Professor Dorothy Roberts. She's a professor at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, with a very impressive background, by the way. If you didn't hear me earlier, she's graduated from Yale University, has a Harvard Law School degree, and has written extensively on race and other topics as well. We are almost at the end of our hour. And Andrew, do you have anything to say?
I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
Because for a very long time, I've always heard race-based statistics about health problems, which really don't seem to have much basis, which is wild.
Yeah.
I never really even thought about that too much.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's great to hear from you because that means I hadn't either. I mean, I had read that human genome about that, 10 years ago when it came out and said, we're all the human race. That's it. But you still, I think that there are still like forms that you fill out in different places and they'll say, what race are you or what, don't they? Or they?
I'm applying for grad schools right now and that's, there's a lot of those, which is wild. I mean, that's sort of different, but I can imagine I've never had to fill one out at like a doctor's office.
No, but it's the same thing for grad school. You have to write a little asterisk in it and say, what are you talking about there?
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the show today. We did.
Yeah.
And let's give them, why don't you do the Facebook and Twitter thing so that...
Our Facebook, like us on Facebook. It is facebook.com. I want to say it's /socialworkersfm. I went and named it. Workers FM. Oh, I don't know. If you search for us, we will come up.
I actually searched Kathryn Zox, the social workers, and it came up. The Facebook. That was it. I just Googled it.
If you go to facebook.com/thesocialworkersfm, our page comes up directly. Or you can search for it in the search bar. I know it comes up. The other thing is Twitter, and that is just Social Workers FM. Follow us on Twitter. We have an active Twitter account. And then you can download all the shows either by going to those sites, because I post links to those, or you could go directly to thesocialworkers.official.fm.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
So connect with us.
Connect with us. Yeah, we're here. And you can also call us and, well, maybe you can. We're not sure about that, but we got to get our phones fixed. Anyway, hope you had a great morning. Have a great week. And Andrew and I will see you next Thursday.